Our topic is actually connected to air transportation. Our unit is airlines, the next unit is airport. So before understanding various aspects of airport, airline, their functioning, operations, we have to understand the basics of air transportation. Then only we can learn what is airline, how it is functioning, how it is connected to airport, all these things. The learning objectives include to comprehend the term aviation, to identify the elements of aviation, to describe the elements of air transportation system, to understand the evolution and the history of air transportation in detail, to come to know about the regulations that support the smooth functioning of international air transportation, and to understand the safety and security issues. These are the learning objectives of this unit. So let us move on to the basics of the fundamentals of air transportation. In air transportation, quite often we use two terms interchangeably. One is aviation. Every day we hear the word aviation. Another word is air transport. These two words are used interchangeably. But in fact, theoretically, practically, both the terms are different. Aviation is one term, air transport is another term. So let us see what is aviation and how it is getting different from air transport. Aviation, in fact, is a very broad term. It's an umbrella term. Aviation, this broader term, it is depicting of all aspects associated with flying using an airplane. So aviation is a broader term. It consists of every aspect associated with flying using a flight, using an aircraft. It consists of a range of businesses. So many businesses are there under this term aviation. It's an umbrella term, as I said. There are many other activities also. All these are included under the term aviation. Even the building of the manufacturing of aircraft is part of aviation. Flying of aircraft is under part of the aviation. All these aspects are part of aviation. But when it comes to air transport, it's a segment under the gamut of aviation. Air transportation is basically the mode of transport using aerial vehicles. Our aerial vehicle is aircraft, and these we will be using for the purpose of moving people, cargo, mail, all these from one place to another. So air transportation is basically the mode of transport using aerial vehicles for the purpose of moving people, cargo, mail from one place to another. Let us go into the details of aviation. As we said, aviation is an umbrella term. Aviation has two major categories. One type we call it as civil aviation, other type we call it as military aviation. Civil aviation and military aviation are the two broad categories under the term aviation. Civil aviation basically consists of two things. One is the commercial air transportation, other is the general aviation. So two terms are there under civil aviation and another one is military aviation. Military aviation is totally different area. Civil aviation is totally different area. So let us see the details of civil aviation and the military aviation. Civil aviation is basically all kind of aviation activities other than military flying, we call it as civil aviation. So it represents all non-military flying. It consists of all commercial, business and personal transportation using aircrafts and flights. General aviation includes all other civil flights, private or commercial flights. Everything that those category comes under the general aviation. So there are two things in the civil aviation. One is commercial aviation and the second one is general aviation. Commercial aviation is the one we see quite often. All the airlines, charter flights, all the kinds of airport, all come under the category of commercial aviation or commercial transportation. But general aviation is totally a different category. It is also a very large category In terms of number of aircraft, in terms of number of airports, etc., general aviation is a large category. So commercial air transportation is all about the transport of passengers, cargo or mail in a professional manner. So from the word commercial itself, we can understand what is commercial air transportation. So that means that is done in a very professional manner. Business organizations are involved, profit is aspect of it, planning is there, management is there, marketing is there, everything is there in the case of commercial air transportation. And they undertake all the transportation activities for the purpose of making profit. Whereas general aviation is also a similar kind of category, but they don't have these kind of passenger or cargo or mail transportation, rather their focus is different. So here the purpose is, that is what is making difference between commercial air transportation and general aviation. Commercial aviation, when we see, we can have two different categories. One is scheduled commercial air transportation and the other one is non-scheduled commercial air transportation. We can also call scheduled services and non-scheduled services. These are the two major components of commercial air transportation. Scheduled services itself, we can understand what is the meaning of that. Scheduled services represent there is a fixed schedule for undertaking the services. In the case of non-scheduled services, there is no fixed timetable. So in scheduled commercial air transportation, the services are undertaken based on a preset timetable. That timetable will be published, and the companies that are undertaking scheduled services, they will be undertaking services based on the fixed timetable. In the case of non-scheduled services, there is no timetable. Rather, they undertake as and when the services, as and when required. So all the airlines, for example, we know different types of airlines, different airlines in India. Air India is there, Jet Airways is there, it was there. Then Vistara Airways is there, SpiceJet is there, Indigo is there. There are different airlines in this country, in our country. So all these airlines are undertaking, they come under the category of scheduled services. Whereas charter airlines come under the non-scheduled services category. Let us go into the details of general aviation categories. General aviation is a very diverse category. Plenty of things are under this. We can learn about, just have an introduction about a few of them. One is instructional flying. We know that, if you want to become a pilot, you need to have a lot of training. How this training is being done? There is a particular category of, agencies or, instruction agent institutes and all. They will be undertaking these kind of trainings. So we will undergo training, and after the training, once it is, there will be certain kind of experiments, examinations and all. After that, you will be getting the license for flying. So that kind of aviation comes under this category. That is called instructional flying. So it is defined as the use of an aircraft for purposes of formal flight instruction with the help of an instructor. So an instructor has to be there, and they will be using an aircraft. Usually the aircraft will be a small aircraft they use. Most of the general aviation category aircrafts are small compared to the other one. In the case of Air India, they use a lot of aircraft, but all the aircrafts, whatever they are using, big aircraft in fact they will be using. But when it comes to general aviation category, the aircraft will be very small. Sometimes it may be 2-seater, 1-seater, 5-seater, 10-seater, up to 20-seater. So that is another difference we can observe in the case of general aviation and commercial air transportation. The next category under general aviation is pleasure flying. What is pleasure flying? We can use aircraft for the purpose of recreation, for the purpose of happiness. So use of an aircraft for personal or recreational purposes, we can call it as pleasure flying. It is another major category. In tourist destinations, there are many aircraft they use for the purpose of pleasure flying. For example, seaplane, helicopter. Different kinds of aircrafts are used under the pleasure flying category. So the purpose is recreation. Another category under general aviation is business flight. That's a major category, particularly in the developed countries like USA and other Western countries, wherever developed business scenario is seen. Business flying is defined as the use of an aircraft to carry people or property to meet the transport needs of officials of a business, a firm, a company, or a corporation. So anything connected to business for the corporates will be using business aircraft for many purposes, for attending meetings, for carrying certain things from one place to another, etc. All comes under the category of business flying. So that is next category. So we discussed three categories. One is instructional flying, pleasure flying, business flying. Another category is aerial work. The work we'll be doing using the flights for the purpose of agriculture, for the purpose of construction, for the purpose of taking photo as part of photography, for surveying, for patrolling, police patrolling, etc., for observation of certain things, for searching and rescue, for aerial advertisement, many things. These kind of aerial works, whatever the aircraft, whatever the flights we are using for that one, that particular aviation, we call it as aerial work aviation. That is also major category. We may not be quite familiar with this, but it is there in by the countries, particularly the developed countries, will be using these quite often. That is what is very important nowadays. Another, even if agriculture is part of aerial one, in some countries they have a separate division for that. So we call it as agriculture flying. That is another category under the general aviation law. Use of an aircraft for activities such as crop dusting, chemical or fertilizer spraying, seed dissemination, prevention of frost formation, insect fighting, animal herding, all come under the category of agriculture flying. Agriculture is a major area where we can use aircraft for various purposes. So many different activities are there. Agriculture in the sense, large scale farms are there where we need to have spraying of different fertilizers, pesticides, all sort of things. Even crop dusting is also there. Many other things are there. So we call it as other flying activities, other flying categories under the general aviation. All general aviation flights other than glider and free balloon flights that cannot be included in the above four categories, we can call it as other flying aviation category. So we discussed different things under this. Under general aviation, it's a major category. Instructional flying is there, pleasure flying is there, business flying is there, aerial work flying is there, agricultural flying is there, and many other flying categories are there under general aviation. Military aviation is it's a major category. Countries are in fact in a race in the case of military aviation as well. Military aviation, simply we can say the use of aircraft and other flying machines exclusively for military purposes. We know that our country has Air Force. Air Force will be utilizing different types of aircraft. All these aircraft will be using for the purpose of the defending the country from the attacks from the enemies and other regions and all. So that's a major category. Military aviation is a very strong category. Lot of research happening. They always use advanced aviation technology. Always the research and development taking place in the military aviation, and it is usually part of the defense systems of sovereign nations. The flights that are used under the military aviation category, usually those are different from the commercial aircrafts and the general aviation aircrafts. They are supposed to fly so fast, and their shape and other things, their technology may be different from other aircraft. There are different types of flights, aircraft we can identify in the military aviation. One is fighter aircraft. Example, MiG-21. We come across this term quite often. That's a fighter aircraft. Some aircraft we call it as ground attack aircraft. For example, A-10. A-10 is a ground attack aircraft, Airbus 10. Surveillance aircrafts are also there in the military aviation. U-2, MiG-25 are These are some examples of surveillance aircraft. Common transport and cargo aircraft are also used in the military. So we have to carry arms and ammunition, people from one place to another to the war sites and all. So these aircraft are also required. Bombers are another kind of aircraft used. Zeppelin, B-29, B-58, all are examples of bombers. Helicopters are quite commonly used by Air Force and under the military aviation. There are many unmanned aerial vehicles are there used under the military aviation. Military aviation is not in our syllabus, so we need not to focus on that one. So this is an introduction about military aviation. Now we are going back to the commercial air transportation. So we discuss civil aviation, its category. Two categories are there. One is civil aviation and the other one is military aviation. In the civil aviation, there are two categories. One is general aviation, other one is commercial transportation. So commercial transportation is that what we have to study in our unit. So commercial transportation or air transportation system, it is a big system. It's a large system, many elements are there. Let us see what are the elements. Airport is an element in a transportation system. That is very important. Airline is another element. That is another important element in the air transport system. Aircrafts are there. Air navigation services are there. So these are the elements in the air transportation system. Airport, we will go into the details of airport later. That is another unit. Airport is the hub of air transportation from where passengers can board and disembark flights. Airlines can process passengers for travel, aircraft can be controlled for smooth flight, and freight forwarders can process cargo and consignments for shipments. All process can be undertaken using the services and facilities of airport. So airport is something like a hub, center of every kind of activities. So the details we'll discuss later. What are aircraft? Aircraft is actually, it's a vehicle. In any transportation system, a vehicle is important. So aircraft is like other vehicles. It is a vehicle. So simply, it's a device. It's a device used for traveling through air, helps in connecting people and places, along with transporting things like cargo. So there are two major aspects with aircraft. One is to transport people, other one is to transport cargo. Aircrafts are created by the aircraft manufacturers. So there are some companies, big companies are there. They manufacture aircraft. There are two categories of aircraft. One is lighter than air aircraft. The other one is heavier than air aircraft. Lighter than air aircraft. These are aircraft that are with lesser weight than the air it displaces and are supported by their own buoyancy or ability to float. Hot air balloons, gas balloons, blimps, non-rigid airships, these are examples of lighter than air aircraft. Our focus is mainly heavier than air aircraft. And these aircraft, these are supported by engines, and these engines help the aircraft to propel and to fly. And as far as major manufacturers concerned, aircraft manufacturers are there. These are the big companies. They make the aircraft. Airbus is one of the leading aircraft manufacturers in the world. You know that Airbus flights are there in India. Many of our airlines in the country, they are using the flights of Airbus. Another major company is Boeing. Boeing is a company from USA. Airbus is a company from Europe. Bombardier Aerospace Group based in Canada is another one. The Embraer, Empresa Brasileira de Aeronautica, it's a company from Brazil. McDonnell Douglas is another company. Lockheed Martin is another company from USA. ATR is also there nowadays. It is in practice. Many airlines are using ATR flights as well. That's also from France and Italy. Canadair and Fokker, that was also there as one of the major aircraft manufacturers. But even if aircraft manufacturers are there, engines for the aircrafts are manufactured by other companies. Some of the engine manufacturing companies Examples are Rolls-Royce, that's a UK company, Pratt & Whitney, that's a USA company, General Electric GE Aircraft Engines, that is another company from USA, IAE, International Aero Engines, that is from Switzerland and partly from USA as well. Rolls-Royce Engine Controls Limited, that is another company from UK. These are the major aircraft engine manufacturing companies. When we think about aircraft, two major categories of aircraft we can see. One is wide body aircraft, other one is narrow body aircraft. Wide body aircraft is nowadays used in commercial air transportation. Wide body, from the term itself, we can understand what is wide body. The body of the aircraft will be very wide. The breadth of the flight, the fuselage of the company will be wide. So it will be having more number of seats in one row. So that is called as wide body aircraft. Usually such wide body aircraft will be having 4 plus 3 plus 3 seats. So that many seats, almost 10 seats will be there in one row. For example, Boeing 747, B747, Boeing 767, B767, A300, Airbus 300, Airbus 310, A330, A4340, DC-10MD-11, all these are examples of wide body aircraft. Narrow body aircrafts are there where the body will be narrow in size, where it may be having one row of seats and the passage will be in the next to it, so that people will be moving through that passage and seating will be arranged on one side. So examples of narrow body is Boeing 717, 737, 757, B717, B737, B757, DC-9, MD-8, Airbus 320, A320. These are examples of narrow body aircraft. There are some smaller aircrafts also there. So we call it as regional jets. These are small flights. They will be conducting operation. Airlines will be conducting these kind of small flights, aircraft, for conducting transportation from hub cities to small cities. Regional turboprops are also there. These aircrafts are also used by smaller airlines. Another major element in the air transportation system is the air navigation services. It is very important because they are controlling the flight of a aircraft. The air travel needs a fine-tuned support system for the safe and smooth operations. Air navigation services is the system that makes air transportation very smooth and very safe affair. Air traffic control, ATC, is part of this aviation air navigation service systems. ATC tower we may be seeing when we go to an airport. There will be a tall tower. Above that tower there will be a particular compartment. It will be controlling the landing and taking off of the flights from the airports and all. But these are having another areas also, offices also, where they will be controlling the remaining part of the flight of an aircraft from one airport to the next airport. And they give directions, they give updates to the flight crew, particularly the cockpit crew. In the cockpit, pilot and co-pilot will be there. So these data will be provided to the pilot frequently, and that helps them to fly smoothly and safely. Let us have a peep through the history of air transportation, how it began. In fact, air transportation is the result of the 20th century. It was born in 20th century, grown in 20th century, and became a huge business, huge sector, huge economic sector in the 20th century. Most of us know the initial stages of air transportation. The experimental flight of Wright brothers that took place in 1903 at Kitty Hawk, North Carolina in USA. Sooner, smaller flights were evolved with single engine and with a capacity of 1 to 2 people. The first airline service was begun in 1914 and it carried only one passenger, and the flight was a single capacity carrier. The first airmail route was started in United States and it was established in 1980, and that had this service from New York City to Washington DC. In between, lot of experiments happened. Aircraft capacity increased. the flight capacity increased, the technology also increased. By 1920s, almost different types of new airlines started operations. After the First World War, European countries such as Germany, France, Britain, they commenced almost 20 small airlines using aircraft that are used for military purposes in the First World War. National carriers like Imperial Airlines, Lufthansa, Air France, they were also born after that. Before that, in Australia, Qantas, another airline, major airline of Australia, that started operation. That started way back in 1920 itself. Towards the end of 1930s, passenger air transportation in the US became a major mode of transport. In the US, we need to understand the air transportation was primarily focused on mail transportation in the beginning. Passenger transportation gained significance later only. In Asia also, in Japan, that began their airline operations after 1922. In India also, air transportation started by 1920s by Tata. Tata Airlines was started that time. During Second World War also, lot of experiments and developmental activities happened in air transportation. Along with the experiments, advanced technologies came. When advanced technologies came, it contributed in the technology of aircraft, and aircraft capacity increased, the speed increased, the comfort increased, the smoothness increased. As transport grew, twin-engine aircraft entered. Douglas DC-3, DC-3, Boeing 247. These are the examples of early twin-engine aircraft. Boeing 247 was developed in 1933, which was revolutionary as a modern passenger aircraft. The experimental flight by Charles Lindbergh in 1927 across Atlantic was a revolutionary, and sooner several air transport companies began to set up. Civil aviation had a landmark period during mid-1940s. In 1940s, by the 1944 period, the Second World War ended. By the time, a lot of technological advancement happened. All these advancements slowly started to being utilized in commercial passenger transportation as well. By this time, more airlines started operations, so more passenger transportation increased to many other areas. A number of airlines increased, number of countries started to have airlines increased, more passenger transportation became a very important commercial activity. So there was competition, there was issues, there was political issues as well. Crossing the border of another country became an issue. Some other countries were enemies, some other countries were friends. So whether a friend's country's airlines can move to another country which was an enemy country before Second War. These kind of issues were there. So there were a lot of conventions. These conventions were focusing on easing, smoothening the air transportation. So the most important convention was Chicago Convention. That happened in 1944, and that became a milestone. It became a milestone in the history of global civil aviation. International Civil Aviation Organization, that is the apex body of civil aviation in the world right now, that is controlling all the standards and the conditions for the flying. They are ensured with the safety recommendations, security recommendations, and the basic requirements that are required for flying aircraft, for airport, all kind of conditions. Everything is given by the International Civil Aviation Organization, ICAO. It's part of United Nations, UN agency. It's a UN agency. So it was formed as part of Chicago Convention. Another agency formed was International Air Transport Association. That is quite commonly frequently we call it as IATA. It was formed with the objective of smooth and efficient commercial air transportation, and it was formed in 1945. Chicago Convention was followed by the Bermuda Agreement in 1946, which set the pattern for most of the other traffic rights agreement. Chicago Convention was followed by Bermuda Agreement, as I said, and all these became milestones, and further conventions happened. When every convention happened, the smoothening improved, more and more easiness happened in the international air transportation. By 1950s, wide body aircraft entered. Jet engines entered. That was very important. Boeing 707, it was a pioneer jet engine. That model went into service in 1958. Wide-body aircraft was experimentally used, but jet engine entry was very important. In Russia, in 1956, jet engine was utilized by an airline, Tupolev Tu-104 jet airliner that was used by Russia in that time. That was another jet engine aircraft. When we think about the history of aviation, air transportation in the world, another very important milestone is deregulation. Deregulation represents easing the regulations involved in air transportation. That is very important, because once upon a time the whole aspects of aviation, air transportation was controlled by government. Government had the flights, government had the airline companies, government had the airports. Everything was controlled by government. So there was no competition. There were so many other issues. Profit was a big problem. Countries faced many issues. Customers had many issues, etc., etc. United States, USA, they wanted to have a change. So they introduced a policy called deregulation policy in 1978. And it was followed by other countries. Europe started deregulation in 1980s only after that. Because of deregulation, the government control over air transportation got reduced drastically. Still, air transportation is one of the most regulated, sector. But still, even if it is there, compared to the early decades and all, this regulation is very, very, very less. A lot of privatization happened. So by this deregulation, the privatization started in a big way. The effects of deregulation in the USA, one major one was privatization air transportation. So private companies started to operate airline companies. That became a very important step in the case of air transportation. Because of private air transportation, privatization in air transportation, rise in competition was there. So new airlines started. Since competition was there, they had a fare war. Companies had a lot of competition in the fare as well. So airfare slump was there. There was a decline in fare. Travel costs reduced. When travel costs reduced, more people started to utilize air transport services. So air travel demand increased like anything. And by the time, loyalty schemes also started by the airline companies. Loyalty schemes, in the sense, mileage schemes are run by the airline companies, so that there are number of passengers who travel very often. So those can travel often. They will be getting some mile points, and all these mile points can be used for on a later, when they get certain number of miles and all, they will be getting some rewards, so that they can ensure the repeat usage of their services. Because of deregulation, airline productivity also improved. Air transport employment sector improved because more airlines were there. So increase in transport employment, or air transport employment was there. Hub and spoke system, it became a major one. Hub and spoke system is actually, it's a kind of network system that we'll discuss later in the airline operations and planning and all. So anyway, that is a kind of system where feeder routes will be there and major trunk routes will be there. From the feeder routes, the passengers will be taken to hub airport. From the hub to the major other cities, it will be taken by another aircraft. So that kind of system was evolved after deregulation. But because of so much of competition, because of the decline in price, seat price and all, financial issues that loomed large over airline business, that became a problem. So many companies had to close down. So mergers and takeovers and alliances happened. Consolidation happened in the airline sector by then. There were so many open sky agreements also. Open sky agreement is a kind of agreement that will be signed between 2 or 3 countries, that depending upon whether the country intention of the countries. So these agreements make frequent services. Any airline can have frequent services between those countries. So that scheme was started by airlines, by the countries in fact. And also another important one, low cost carriers, LCC. In India we know that there are different types of low cost carrier. For example, SpiceJet is a low cost carrier. Indigo is a low cost carrier. These kind of airlines were started in 1970s, and it became very prominent after deregulation because the travel costs, the fare got reduced drastically, and because of that, these LCCs that was entered as a new model of airline business, and they started to sell tickets for very low cost, but they did not provide any in-flight services. Thus, they managed the business, and they became a prominent airline business model. In the case of transportation, we know that there are different kinds of bilateral regulations that will be happening, that will be signed by countries, and because of these bilateral agreements, that is the reason how this international air transportation is taking place. For example, the the airline from India can undertake transportation to Pakistan, and Pakistan's airlines can undertake transportation to India because these two countries are signed agreements. Same way, India and Japan, India and Russia, India and England, all these countries, there are agreements between every countries and all. These bilateral agreements are the base for the smooth transportation in the case of international air transportation. We use a term for representing some rights for them. Once we sign bilateral agreements, that bilateral agreements will be based on these kind of rights. These rights we call it as freedoms of air, freedoms of the air. So these are the bilateral air transport agreement takes place between two nations. They sign to allow international commercial air transport services between their territories. The commercial access to other markets became possible by the establishment of these traffic rights. And this traffic right, that is a right actually, once a country is signing a right with a bilateral agreement with another country, so a right is being given to both the countries. So the traffic right is a market access right. Let us see what are the freedoms of air. There are 9 freedoms of air, 5 are very common, 4 are rare. First freedoms of air is very simple. That gives the right or the privilege in respect of scheduled international air services granted by one country to another country or countries to fly across the territory without landing. In the sense, if India has agreed a first freedom right with Sri Lanka, so Sri Lankan airlines can fly over the territory of India since they have signed this agreement, which is having first freedom is also there as part of that agreement. The second freedom of the air, it provides the right or privilege in respect of the scheduled international air services granted by one country to another country or countries to land in its territory for non-traffic purposes. Non-traffic purposes in the sense not for commercial purposes. It can be for fueling the aircraft. It can be for some technical repairing and all. So these kind of non-traffic purposes, if this freedom is included in the agreement, then the airline of that country can land in any of the airport in the other country for the non-traffic purposes. The third freedom of the air, it provides the right or privilege in respect of scheduled international air services granted by one country to another country to put down in the territory of the first country the traffic coming from the home country of the carrier of the airline. Whereas the fourth freedom, it provides the right or privilege in respect of scheduled international air services granted by one country to another country to take on in the territory of the first country the traffic which is destined for home country. That means one country can undertake transport services from another country to their country. The fifth freedom of the air, it provides the right or privilege in respect of scheduled international air transport services granted by one country to another country to put down and take on in the territory of the first country the traffic that is coming from the third country. So that is the right provided by the fifth freedom. Sixth freedom of air, it provides the right or privilege in respect of scheduled international air services for transporting via the home state of the carrier for traffic moving between two other states. In the sense, three countries are involved, the transportation is between second country and the third country via the home country. The seventh freedom of the air is the right or privilege in respect of scheduled international air services granted by one country to another for transporting traffic between the territory of the granting state or granting country and any third country with no requirement to include on such operation any point in the territory of the recipient state. That is, the service need not to connect to or be an extension of any service from the home country. So, for example, if India has signed this agreement with another country, with another two countries, the airline of India can undertake transport without undertaking transport into the country, into India. We can have transportation between those two countries. The eighth freedom of air, it provides the right or privilege in respect of scheduled international air services for transporting cabotage traffic between 2 points in the territory of granting state on a service which originates or terminates in home country of the foreign carrier outside the territory of the granting state. Whereas ninth freedom is also called standalone cabotage. It provides the right or privilege of transporting cabotage traffic of the granting state, granting country on a service performed entirely within the territory of the granting state. For example, if ninth agreement is signed between India and Russia, an Indian airline can undertake service between 2 points within Russia. No need to connect to India, but from one city to another city within Russia, they can have the transportation. So, Open Skies Agreement we already discussed. It is referred to either a bilateral or multilateral transport agreement between countries. It liberalizes the rules for international aviation markets and minimizes government intervention. Under Open Sky Agreement, airlines of both countries can fly any route they wish between the countries and can continue those flights into third country. It provides a free market for aviation services and offers more benefits for passengers, shippers, and the economy of the country on a wide scale.
In order to conclude this, aviation is an umbrella term that consists of civil aviation and military aviation in general. Civil aviation includes commercial air transportation and legal general aviation. Air transportation system involves airports, airlines, aircraft, and air navigation services. These are the elements of air transportation system. Air transport has evolved over the last several decades. Maybe it was born in the last century and has grown as one of the major industry in 20th century. It had a humble beginning in 1903 when Wright brothers experimented the flying of the first aircraft. There are different types of regulations existing in international air transportation that are based on bilateral and multilateral agreements. A range of safety and security issues are there in air transportation, and that makes air transport sector with maximum safety and security measures. With this, let us conclude this unit.